All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I promise I'll try to keep it brief and high level so everybody can understand what I'm talking about. So, as Fraser mentioned, today the session is all about um, post-incident activity, right, under the underlying theme of strengthening our overall cybersecurity. But we're going to be focused a little bit on what happens after we've suffered a breach, right, and we're able to recover. A little bit about the agenda today, roughly the topics we're going to be touching on. We're going to be identifying what went wrong, what's going to be a methodology for identifying those areas for improvement, making the right choices moving forward, right? Because it's, we identify what went wrong so we can pick how we can improve moving forward, understanding a little bit better what are the roles and responsibilities for our organization, specifically with kind of the incident response, as well as managing our security and infrastructure. And then some of the key takeaways that I'm hoping that you get out of this webinar today. So the incident is over, right? We've suffered a breach. We're struggle around. We put together a team. We'll dealt with it. It's been long and painful process, or more often than not. So now what? Like oftentimes when you go through the incident response process, it can be quite lengthy. Takes a lot out of you and your whole team. And the last thing you want to do once you're like find yourself at the other side of the tunnel is revisit that bad memory, right? And trying to identify what went wrong. But it's very important at that point to just take a pause, reflect on what happened with a critical eye, not one that blames people for the situation, but one that is more of an inquisitive and trying to learn from the situation and see how you can improve. So some of the things that you probably want to reflect on during a post-incident review is the communication between the teams. And when I'm talking about the communication between the teams, I'm not just talking about during the incident. I'm actually talking throughout the whole process, prior, during, and after, how we can change that moving forward. Was there any budget issues that might have led or contributed to the incident? So for example, we do not have enough budget to put an antivirus solution to our computers, and therefore we're not protected. Did the security controls that we have in place actually not work as expected, right? We thought we had, for example, a pretty strong password for our application. Turns out it wasn't. Did the people follow the process, right? So we might just have a very stipulated process about how we store our data, right? We might just give, George, I just give the finance team, my personal information. That's restored securely, right? Or there's a very strict process of how you can store this. Turns out it wasn't followed because it's very strenuous or for whatever reason. My data ended up being on another system of good breach, and therefore now it's been compromised and lost, right? There's also an aspect about the process. Another thing that is more of a mindset, which I kind of come across, I come across it over my career in incident response, is the idea that this won't happen to us, right? Well, why would anyone target me? I haven't done anything to anyone. And that can go bad very quickly. It's just a matter of time in 2024 on when we're going to have an incident. It's not a matter of if. And last but not least, right, does the incident response plan exist? And if it exists, do we need to update it? Because when we had to reflect on it, right, it was full of dust and it wasn't actually helpful during the time of need. So something to keep in mind. So talking a little bit about cyber culture, right? Touching on the communication part. Did the IT team or our security team know about the systems that have been compromised or the assets that have been compromised? You'd be surprised how many times those teams get informed by the end user that they have an issue about a system they had no idea that ever existed. We often refer to this as shadow IT. That's the kind of jargon that we like to use in the information security space. It's very important that those teams are aware of what the organization has. Therefore, they can make informed decisions about how to protect it. If we don't know what we have, then we can't protect it. Secondly, does the organization overall foster a culture of communication? You'll be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how many times cross-department collaboration does not happen. You might have for example, the technology team, right? They're developing, engineering applications. They don't want to talk to the security team because the moment they're going to have a conversation about here's a new application that we have to develop for our client, the security team is going to start asking, have you thought about the security aspects? What are you doing about those considerations? Maybe we need to take a pause and think about those things. And then the tech team thinking, I have a deadline to hit. I don't have the time for all this conversation. I'm just going to skip that part because I just need to meet my client demands. And that can go bad very quickly. Another example is kind of extends on the example I just gave. Is cyber an enabler or does it just get in the way? The amount of times where the root cause of an actual incident is not a end user's fault, but it's actually the process is alarming. So, for example, if the end user needs to print things from a system, and the only way they can transfer the data over is with a USB stick, they're going to use a USB stick for this to go to the printer. And if that USB stick gets misplaced because we don't have a technology solution that allows somebody not to have to transfer it over with a USB stick, then it's not the user's fault that they have misplaced a USB stick device. It's more about thinking the process of all of these strict controls about not allowing the system to talk with each other might have actually contributed to the incident. So you have to think about cyber and cybersecurity as being an enabler for your organization and not actually getting in the way by introducing processes that are getting in the way of doing your work. One of the top security controls where we have seen failed in the past, reflecting on incidents in the region for the last few years, I would say. At the top comes lack of multi-factor authentication, the amount of times where the entry point of the threat actor has been by compromised credentials. I would say it's hovering around 70 to 80% of the cases. We see somebody got VPN credentials, and since COVID came to be, everybody got familiar with the term VPN, whether they're technical or not. So essentially, if you want to work from home and access your office resources, you have to log in through a VPN. If you do not have multi-factor authentication with this, and as a hacker, I've obtained your credentials, all I need to get into your company is just that, and then just immediately land into your house uninvited. It's a very simple control. Oftentimes we see it not enabled. Next one on the list, especially with the significant rise and continuing exacerbation of ransomware attacks, lack of sufficient backups. What do we mean by that? Oftentimes, the backups are not as frequent as the business needs, or sometimes what ends up happening is we have a file server where you store all our information for our day-to-day job, where everybody gets to access. And we do understand that there's a need for a backup, so we take a weekly backup of all the information. But we store the backups onto the same file server. So guess what happens? When the hackers get in and they compromise the file server or the data gets encrypted, the backup itself is also affected because it's in the same location as the production data. Bad idea. Another example is not everything is backed up. We haven't had this conversation, so I was actually holding a small part of my business that I didn't let my IT team know about it because they're just going to put controls or they would just get into the way of me doing my work. So I never told them about it. We've been breached. I lost my data and there has been no backup configured as a result. And now I'm lost. I have to deal with a very painful data loss. Last but not least, I would say is weak credentials, and that can be even more damaging if we do not have multi-factor authentication. The amount of times where we see credentials that are very seasonal, like whatever movie is on the cinemas. We've seen things from like Thor 2022 or Summer 2024, all of those things, right, which are very seasonal. We always use those as examples of bad passwords. but there is a reason why they are the top 100 or top 1,000 list of bad passwords, because people are actually using them. The use of the actual password as a password in an environment that has 1,000 users, I can almost guarantee you, I would be willing to bet good money on it, that you see it on a few users. It's always there for a reason. So avoiding or putting controls around bad credentials is a key security control for everyone to consider. So we've been talking quite a bit about some of the underlying issues that can cause our security posture to be weak, and some of the controls that are often failing if they're not sufficient compensating controls. So then the question comes in: how do we measure that we have enough security, right? It's easy for us security folks to say, here's, in an ideal world, everything that you should be doing, and we can come up with a very exhaustive list of security controls and tools and software you can buy to make sure that you build an impregnable fortress around your business. But then the bill at the end of the day is going to be massive. So the question then gets reduced to a very kind of simple chart that you see on my screen. That's the way I like to represent it. You have to start thinking your security as the amount of investment you have to make into it to outweigh the efforts that a hacker is willing to do to breach you. In other words, hackers nowadays are increasingly seeing this more as a business from their point of view. So they're willing to invest some time upfront to try to breach your company. But if the amount of time and cost of their own infrastructure outweighs the potential benefit from them, they're just going to move on to the next victim. So you don't have to invest to a ton of solutions, right? You just have to identify for your own business, right? What does make sense, right? What is the potential threat actor that will be trying to breach your network? What are their capabilities? And then you can backtrack from that and then identify how much of an investment you should be making. In other words, it doesn't make sense for a small business of, let's say, 40 to 50 people to invest in the same kind of tools where a sovereign will need to secure their own infrastructure. So a nation state threat actor has a significantly different set of capabilities and time that they will be willing to spend to breach another nation state, but they wouldn't be targeting a small business of 50 people. So you should be looking at the threat actor profile of someone that has a team of 2 to 3 people. They're just looking to spend 10 hours, 5 hours to see if they could get into your network. That's your threat actor profile. So backtracking from this will identify what's the budget you should be spending onto your own security. Now, this is an oversimplification, but to give you an idea of how you should be thinking about those things. Next up, it's a phrase that was drilled into my brain very early on in my career, and something that I learned from some of my colleagues back in my time in London. It's the 6 Ps. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And the message behind this is we expect that something bad is going to happen and we plan in advance for it. And we have planned sufficiently for it. And then when the time comes and we do have an incident, then we're prepared to deal with it. We know what's going to be the right team. We know what's going to be the right process. We know, for example, you don't have to manage everything yourself. You can reach out to your trusted partners like Blackpanda or whoever else you've been working with, and then can help you with some of the aspects. You don't have to do everything yourself, but you have planned in advance and you know who to talk to, when to talk to them, and know how to reach out to them. So have you list down their the contact details, the email address, the hotline that you need to call. If you had all of those things planned in advance, your experience during an incident is going to be significantly better, all things considered, versus if you haven't. Now, if we can, for a moment, put on the hat of a threat actor. Let's say that now we are the attackers and we're trying to breach a company. How do those guys think? Understanding how they think can help us then plan on how to prevent those attacks. as I mentioned before, they just look at this as a business. And as a business, they are also making the most of their own time. So the way that they mostly get into systems is with a few things, right? Phishing attacks, it's always going to be there, right? Uh, Exploiting vulnerabilities. So there is a particular set of vulnerabilities that are most likely to be used by the threat actors to get into your networks. And they will always try the Hail Mary, a brute force attack. People have creatures of habits. They tend to use bad passwords. They have always done that. They will always continue to do so. So they try those things. How can we defend against those things? Patching priority systems and specific vulnerabilities. We don't have to like try to patch everything and all the time, but there's specific vulnerabilities that are most likely to cause damage to a company that we should be prioritizing those. Specifically, CISA, that's the cybersecurity agency out of the United States, maintains a list of such vulnerabilities that you should be focusing and patching urgently. Everything else can take a less priority because the exploitation of them won't lead to the same bad outcomes as the other ones. Having strong credentials and overall identity and access management policies, right? We talked quite a bit about lack of multi-factor authentication being an issue, bad credentials being an issue. Putting some controls around this can significantly reduce our own attack surface. And then being aware that we should not be thinking as having only one very strong control around an environment. We should be thinking of creating what's referred to as an onion mindset, right? Where we have certain layers of security controls and everything kind of works as a compensation. So if one failed in the beginning, for example, somebody was able to convince one of our users to click on a malicious link, then we have another control that checks, hey, is that link actually something that we should be allowing access to? And then you can block it with a sandbox, right? Or somebody downloaded the malware on the computer, and then the antivirus control that we have on the actual user's endpoint that fell for the trick kicked in, identified that as a malware, and then it blocked it. So what that achieves is that it requires for a threat actor to be successful multiple times into their own attack chain before they be successfully breach a network. So thinking about compensating controls and fallback controls is the way, and not just about I'm going to have a very strong firewall and then nobody will be able to get in. Therefore, once I get into my company, I don't need to have anything else as secure, right? So think of it like an onion where you have multiple layers before you can get into the crown jewels. Moving on, talking about the planning, right? What does this mean? Essentially, an incident response plan, having incident response playbooks and runbooks. We need to identify at the minimum 1 or 2 scenarios that we want to prepare for. For most people, that's tend to be ransomware and phishing type of incidents. And having a very strong incident response plan that clearly articulates, what are the right steps? How do we prioritize an incident? How we classify an incident? How do we allocate the proper severity on it? And then what is going to be the team, right, that is going to be tasked with dealing with it? And not just defining the team, but it's very important to have a RACI metrics. And within that metrics, everybody is clear on what they're expected to do, who needs to be informed, who's responsible for a task, who's going to be ultimately accountable, and who needs to be consulted before we take an action. Thinking about all of those things before an incident is crucial, so we can plan for it, put it in the incident response plan, and then when they need to make a decision and the pressure is on, you have something you can fall back to and you don't have to think on your feet. You just follow the process. And last but not least, that's a live document. It's not about just doing this exercise once. It's about doing it and then maintaining and testing it, making sure that it's current, and any amendments that you need to do, you are doing them. One of the last things that I want to mention today on the webinar is the survivor bias concept in security. If you're not familiar with this picture, it's from the Second World War when the The generals were just looking at the planes that were returning from the battlefield and were looking at where they had holes. The reason that we're doing this is because they wanted to see where they need to strengthen it to make sure that it endures and the plane survives and the pilot survives. But what ends up happening, right, they fell into the full assumption of looking at the planes that returned and had holes in it. And they assumed that that's where they need to reinforce. However, it's the places that were not getting hit that they should be reinforcing because those planes never returned. How does this translate to cybersecurity? We tend to focus on the areas where we see the most alerts. So we have phishing security controls where they keep flagging, oh, this is malware, this is malware, this is no, this is malicious email, we should quarantine it, and we keep investing more and more there. That control seems to be working if you're getting alerts. There is a discussion to be had about how many, but if it's getting alerts, it works. How about the other places that you haven't heard about anything? Maybe you should be spending some time to revisit those areas because there could be something going wrong and it's quiet and you never know about it until it blows up. That's the concept here. That's what I want you to think about. Security is difficult, but you don't have to do it everything by yourself. So keep in mind, especially for those that are smaller in size, so the SMBs, you can use your trusted partners. You don't have to do everything yourself. That's the part of planning in advance. You can figure out what are the things that you can do, and you can figure out what are the things that you hope you get help with, and then you can plan for it. Don't fall into the trap that you have to do everything yourself. Use your trusted partners. They have the expertise required to advise you at the time of need, and ideally even before that. That's a very strong message that I want you to take from today. So, to close this off, the key takeaways for today. Cybersecurity is a state. It's something that you have to maintain. It's just like your own health. You don't just think of it as a one-off exercise where you invest time and money and then you don't have to think about it again. That's the wrong mindset. It's a continuous process. Planning ahead and testing your plans. You can't just expect that you're going to rise to the occasion when you have an incident. What you end up happening is you fall to the highest level of your own preparedness. Plan and test your plans. Do not conflate IT and IT security. They're different things. There is some overlap with the skills, but there's different domains and different mission statements. IT is making sure the lights are on. IT security is making sure that they're secure. Different things. Foster for your whole organization a cybersecurity culture. We need to make sure that everybody participates and they feel that they can participate. As an example, I am a user. I received a malicious email today. I clicked on the link. I later reflect on it and said, I feel that that was a mistake, but because we're getting penalized in my company, if I report it, I'm going to be quiet about it. That's exactly the kind of wrong message you want to send. You want to encourage everybody to participate, those that are aware and those that are not as aware in cybersecurity, and help everybody protect their overall organization. If I feel that I can talk about a mistake that I made without being penalized, then guess what? That's a better outcome for the whole organization because we can deal with it before it manifests into something bigger. And last but not least, we talked about it. Don't try to think that you have to do everything in-house. You don't have the budget to hire the full set of people that you need. Use your trusted vendors, get the advice that you need. There's tons of material online, as well as vendors that we're more than happy to help you reach out and leverage their own expertise. So that is it for today. I spoke a little bit longer than planned, but I'm happy to take any questions.